Okay, so today we have with us Kautuk Srivastava, who is an author, stand-up comedian, writer, and a popular podcast host, if I may say so.
Yeah,
So
sure.
yeah, so here we go. So we are going to discuss the process that you write with today, like the what is your writing process and how do you shift your writing process from whatever you are writing. So
Hmm.
let's start off with how did you get into writing so much? Starting with.
Um, I think what it was I was always interested in reading,
Hmm.
and if you are a reader long enough, then you start realizing that sometimes the only way to find the stories you want to read are to write them yourselves. Like you get you kind of get like, "Ki, I also want to do something like this," right? And so that's how I think it starts. And I think I was always captivated by books enough that I wanted to be an author. That's where it first started, and it took years to eventually make that happen. But yeah, that's where it began.
So you said that you like reading and stuff like that. So what are your favorite authors? Like it's a long, I know it's a long list, but like if we go genre wise, which one would your top picks be? Like for sci-fi, for horror, for murder mystery, fiction, and stuff like that.
I mean, I wouldn't do it that way, because like I think the thing about your favorite writers and all that is that generally speaking, you tend to have a favorite. Like if you're a passionate reader, you tend to have a favorite writer every. It changes every 3 years,
Yeah.
depending on your reading interests. But the people who've kind of like the writers who've kind of stuck with me, the starting ones you cannot ever forget, which
Hmm.
is like for me the author that changed my life was PG Woodhouse.
Yeah.
He's a humor writer. Read his books. I was like, "Yay karna hai life mein." Um, so PG Woodhouse for sure. I always love a good Agatha Christie. I love a good Stephen King. Can never let go. Um, Manu Joseph's books I thoroughly enjoy. I've enjoyed all of them. Um, I'm in a history phase right now, so I'm going through a couple of like just popular science and history and stuff like that. So Bill Bryson for sure, I would put up there. Um, and the other tricky thing about this question is that whenever you ask somebody who their favorite author is, that's the moment they forget who their favorite authors are. So there's a substantial bunch of people that I've read, but Jack Kerouac is another that comes to mind. But we'll just keep going on. So yeah, some of these are my influences, people that I've enjoyed. Um, but yeah, and the favorite one keeps changing.
Makes sense. So there's this thing that happens with me a lot when I'm writing, which is that if I'm writing, let's say, a skit or a play for something, and then I have to switch to writing stand up, my focus entirely shifts, and then I'm not able to put my like get into the headspace for it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So how do you like change your focus? Because I know that at one point of time you're writing multiple things. Like red
yeah.
card ke waqt you were writing two like 6 years mein you did a lot. But yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you get through that?
That's an interesting question. It's a very true thing, and it's very um, it's an emotion, or like a sort of like an experience that you go through if you are like, so some people are lucky enough to just do that one type of writing, and
Yeah.
they don't have to take up any other kind of writing to pay bills. But my trajectory has been very different. Like I dabbled in a bunch of different types of writing, from novels to stand up to screenplay writing and stuff like that, and they're all different. And I think um I think the easiest way to look at it, probably, or the best way to look at it, would be to kind of understand, like, there's a thing called first principles, right? First principles are like, what are the fundamental things that you need to know about each type of writing, and each type of writing is slightly different. So if you can figure out what the fundamental principles of each one are, like, you don't necessarily need uh, a, a sort of dramatic arc in stand up, but you definitely need that in storytelling. So that's a fundamental principle for me when it comes to storytelling, right? So I need to have that. So to make those shifts is what essentially I'm looking toward to doing when I'm working on these things. You start from what is it that constitutes stand up, and how do I now look at the work from that particular lens. The other thing is just like experience, where you this happens like when I'm in a, like right now I'm doing a lot of fiction writing,
Correct.
a lot of like fictional storytelling stuff. So your mind kind of starts forming patterns around that, right? And it takes it's like I would liken it, the closest thing that you can say towards making the shift is you kind of have to do a warm up,
Mm.
just like you would in sports. You have to warm you have to warm your mind up towards getting ready to do the thing that you're doing. So if you're doing stand up, then just do a little warm up of like writing jokes. Eventually with a lot of practice you get to the point where your mind goes like, okay, okay, we're changing gears, got it, and then you it becomes easier. And it's like uh, and I think also regular practice, if that makes sense. Like you
Yeah.
can't do it sporadically. You can't be like,
Correct.
I'm going to do fiction writing and then forget about it for 10 years and then remember everything just as well. That doesn't work. So you have to constantly work at each one and kind of keep them all polished up.
How many stories have been canned in this process? Like I'm sure
Uh,
that you have written something, you've written the pilot for something, and then you've forgotten about it for years, and
oh yeah.
then
Oh yeah.
so
I mean, I don't think, I think there are very few people in the world, and they are ultimate geniuses who just write something and then that's the thing, right? That's the best thing that was ever written. I don't work like that. I think like I've got more stuff that I've hated, more stuff that I've not, it's not gone anywhere. Got ideas. I tell people about them, and then for the rest of my life, they're like, "What happened to that idea?" And I'm like, "Fuck, nothing happened to that idea." So yeah, I mean, like I think the way to look at it is that it's always a better place to have ideas that don't go anywhere than to have no ideas at all,
yeah,
because
makes
that's
sense.
a risk that also happens with writing, where you are bankrupt, right? Creatively, and you don't want to be ever in that position. I think that's far scarier to me and far more sadder and more disappointing than having more ideas. So yeah, I
Makes
mean,
sense.
I'll wear it as a badge of honor, more or less.
All right. So, one more question that I have regarding stand up, it's that
Hmm.
stand up is also storytelling, right? So, in some sense, like there's categories to stand up.
Yeah,
There's
yeah. There's
ways
some
to
of it is
going about
storytelling,
stand
some
up.
of it is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of it is observational, some of it is storytelling. But like your last special was more of a story than
Yeah.
like last special in the sense anatomy of
Anatomy of
awkward.
awkward.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was more of a story. So
Mm.
usme bhi there was a dramatic sense to it, like regarding the
Yeah.
sense that how you met your wife and how you did that. So that was very dramatic in a sense. So like
Yeah.
did writing the TV shows that you did, like you wrote Everybody Loves Raymond ka Hindi adaptation, which was Sumit Sambhale ka and stuff like that. Did that help you in some sense while writing
Oh,
this?
100%. 100%. I think if you're like, the thing that I think about is that nothing you do in life ever goes completely
Waste.
it's never wasted. Yeah, it always percolates into some part of your life. It always percolates into some part of your work. It always percolates into some part of your thinking, which is what becomes interesting. um when I was writing that, it helps that I have a sense of story. It helps that I know where conflict is, where drama is, where like what dialogue looks like, when it should be presented, how it should be presented. I mean, uh, to just know a little bit more about that helps writing all of that stuff. And yeah, like when you are doing there's like a very big, like for example, I'll give you an example between like writing stand up stories and writing stories, right? So in a stand up story, there is a far greater economy of words. I can't spend 3 paragraphs just describing a setting to you. I
Correct.
can't spend 3 paragraphs just describing a character to you, right? I can't do any of that. I
You'll see
have to
that red
quickly,
light and you have to go off stage.
yeah, and it's boring for the audience because
Yeah.
that's not, and that's so stand up kind of completely distills the story down to its absolute bare bones, raw, sometimes unaesthetic nature. When you're writing prose, you have those opportunities for indulgences, and it's not just an indulgence, it's also necessary because the audience is entertained by nothing except the black words on a white page. So therefore you need to fill in as much color so that their minds can start picturing all of that stuff, right? But with stand up, there is an objective to it. The objective is not, part of the objective is to tell a story, but the majority of it is to get a laugh, right? I'm always gearing myself towards how do I get a laugh, how do I get a laugh, how do I get a laugh. And that's, and if you're telling a comedic, like a stand-up story, and you don't get a laugh, then it's a great story, but it serves no purpose in stand-up, right? So the objectives are different, the nature of it is different, but the principles are the same. When I'm chalking out that story, the structure, the bones of it, I could write that same structure as a dramatic piece, I could write it as a comedy piece, I could write it as like in different ways. So the principles remain the same, but the approach is very different, the mindset is very different, the kind of like the work you're doing, that story transforms in a sense.
Got it. One more thing that I wanted to ask. One of my favorite series, like TV shows ever, Shaitan Haveli. Like
Oh
amazing, right? It's so so
nice.
it's
Huh.
the only TV show in the space of that horror comedy in India, at least, right? Because we
Mm.
don't have that many horror comedy shows in India.
I, yeah, I wouldn't say only, but it's definitely amongst the few
Yeah,
that
like
yeah,
it's like 442 in
people,
India, correct? So,
yeah, yeah, huh.
so what I'm saying is writing that and approaching producers for that would have been a task because it's completely different from what you are doing, right? So how did you and Varun Thakur, that is, approach that? Like, how did you guys go to producers and pitch? This is the pilot, and this is how we want to go about it.
So sorry, just one second. Huh. So um with Shaitan Haveli, it was like, thankfully for me at least, that burden of approaching producers was completely taken care of by Varun. So this was Varun's idea, and like we had in 2015, a long time back, we had we had discussed like wanting, because we both love
Horror
pulpy
comedy.
horror
Hmm.
movies. Like that's our thing. Like we love it. Like if it's horror and it's bad, then I will watch it for sure. So we both love that kind of cinema, and we wanted to like make something in that zone, and we always felt like there was a lot of scope for humor within that, right? So years later, then when Varun got an opportunity to pitch this idea, he was, so here's the thing, right? Like ideas are easy to communicate to people when you are absolutely passionate about it.
Hmm.
When you love something, it is very easy to convince somebody else that this might be an interesting idea, right? So and we came to it with an interesting sort of premise. Like it was a nice premise, it was like a funny take on the whole thing, and we wanted to like, and we did our research, which was fun, which was watching all of this crap and then reading we read a couple of books about it. It was a good sort of experience. So uh, selling it to producers wasn't really the hardest part. The hardest part was when you're doing anything that is genre mixing, which is that we did horror plus comedy, right? To get the balance right is where it's difficult, because you can either be too scary or too funny or neither. So to get it just right, or to get it as close to just right, was our biggest challenge, right? And so we slaved over that a lot. Like can we tell the story in a different way? Can we have this can it not be just a regular horror film? And when you start deconstructing that, you realize how many tropes you are there to play with, how many things you can change, how many things you can't change, and you realize there are things you can't change because otherwise the whole thing falls apart. So it was an interesting experience, not so much difficult to produce, but Definitely difficult to shoot and difficult to write.
There have been multiple instances in Shaitan Haveli only in which the blood is coming from here and the chaku is here and stuff
Yeah,
like that. So, I,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
know that was like you thought about it. It was well thought about in some sense because you guys wanted to go in that space, right?
Yeah, like there was one clip we had watched which we used as a reference for the kind of stuff we want to do, which is that there's one, it's a haunted, it's a movie, okay, a horror movie, supposedly horror movie, where the the so it's a horror movie. The heroine is on the bed, and the scare is that suddenly she can hear some noise. She gets up, and suddenly a cat comes flying at her. Right, that's the scare. Except in this movie, what they did is the heroine hears stuff. She gets up, and the producers had to fling a cat at her. Right, they had to physically throw the cat at her, but instead of throwing it frontally, they have thrown it horizontally. So there's a cat that's flown in like this and hit her, right? And you can see that the cat, so you can imagine that the cat has been thrown like this, like someone was holding it and then they fucking threw it. And it was hilarious to us that a cat came flying sideways. So we were like, yeah, this sideways cat shit we have to do. So like everywhere where we could get these technical things wrong, right? That's what we we went for. We're like, chal, ये सब डालते हैं script में.
Okay, so
हाँ,
the last question I would like to ask Abhi, last
हाँ,
question. So you're a part of two podcasts right now, right?
yeah.
One is the Internet Set, so one is the one is 442. I forgot for a
Yeah.
second. So
The one that's
one is
paying
442.
you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one is 442, one is the Internet Set. So and
Hmm.
uh, one of it, like the Internet Set, so I'll say that it's quite massy in its reach and stuff like that
Hmm.
because a lot of people know. In 442, we are like conversing with an audience which is not that big. So it's a
Hmm.
very small Indian football community plus the NRIs that know about Indian comedians that have gotten to know our podcast from different aspects of their life, whatever, in YouTube, Instagram, or something like that. So
Hmm.
uh, is there a filter that you have when it comes to both these podcasts? Like, and is there any difference in the filter that you have to like when you're communicating something, some idea or some thought while you're saying like there are some things that you can definitely say without any filter on 442 that you might as well not say on this.
Yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't say this is like massy, but I would say that this has a broader scope
Hmm.
because it's about a lot of things. Like I could tell a
Internet.
sports, yeah, I
Hmm.
could tell a sports story on this,
Hmm.
right? A story from the sports world, I could tell it on this, but I can't talk about a lot of stuff on 442 because it's not football related, right? So like the filter on 442 is very narrow. It's only football related stuff, right? And that too mostly tends to be um,
United Barca.
United, Real Madrid, and Chelsea, and then obviously
Yeah.
the Barca stuff is uh,
We're
toppings.
not going to talk
But
about Arsenal today, guys. It's 27th of September, just
oh
putting it
man,
out
yeah,
there.
yeah. There's no fun in talking about Arsenal. So we'll talk about praising Tottenham's effort. So
Yeah.
um, no, the point is that there's not much difference in terms of like in terms of like your approach to it. The approach is, it's just that like some like the communities are different, and I
Yeah.
think the thing that happens which is that's the beauty of a good podcast is where like the audience and you are in complete sync, where the stuff that you do the audience knows about, and then they like there's a relationship, there's genuinely like some kind of like understanding ki, acha, this person does talks in this way, thinks in this way, behaves in this way, right? And and like you respond to each other, right? When
Correct.
the chat says something, you're also like, oh, all right, that's interesting. And there's a sort of give and take in that, right? So that's what shapes the podcast in two different directions. Like the community on 442 is very different than the
the
community
community.
on TIS. There is obviously a large overlap, but generally that's what it is. And what we feel about our clubs determines how we are on the podcast, right?
Mhm.
So, or what's happened that week. Like I'm what a week it's
I
been anyway.
we'll see.
So yeah, so I mean that stuff is what changes, but and I think the interesting thing about this is also that it's been such a long running podcast that now it's gone through several different iterations,
Hmm.
right? Like we started with on the as a sort of like we went to a set, we were sitting together on sofas, and then because of the pandemic we had to shift to the internet, doing Zoom shows. That changes the flavor a little bit, and then now we're in like the third iteration, which is like this completely different format change. So all of those things also make a difference, that uh, in the way that you have to approach it, but it's not like in terms of what you can say or stuff like that, or how you want to tell a joke. That's not different. That's not different at all.
Okay. Like one, not a question, but one of the most beautiful moments that I saw on the internet. I was a part of it in a small, very small sense. Was Internet Setsuka 100th episode ka stream
Oh
when
yeah,
we let
yeah,
all the people in on
yeah,
the Zoom
yeah,
call,
yeah,
and that made all
yeah,
four of you very emotional. I could see that. So
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. It
that
was
was
crazy.
an overwhelming experience. So like how do you describe that in a few words? Like if you could, like if you could, then how would you describe?
I mean, why was it? It was just, I mean, to reach 100, like to do a podcast every single week for 100 weeks is like, usually you don't think about it because it's, you're very much like, okay, this ye karna hi hai, right? Her Tuesday ye dalna hai, right? So you don't really take too much time to think about these things. But when like there's like, which is why the importance of these milestones are there, right? Like they give you a marker to kind of just become a little reflective. And it felt nice that like we had the discipline and the ability to reach 100 episodes, and we didn't run out of shit to talk about, or no one changed the password, or the group didn't fall apart. There's a bunch of stuff that can happen. One was that, and then the second one was the more important one was that just to see, man, like, look, as a you get into any kind of like the arts field, or stand up or writing or whatever it is. You get into it so that you can communicate your ideas to other people, right? And the best thing that can happen, the absolute best outcome, is that people resonate with those thoughts or ideas or work, right? Money and everything else that comes with it is a fully second thing. The first is that thing. And that night when we let everybody in, and you could see, like, I think in part we were just also responding just to the joy of the public that
Yeah.
was there. And if you see that you're making like, you're doing your job, and it's like we're doing a comedy podcast and people are happy to listen to it, and they were happy to be on the stream. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like we did something interesting and nice. So it was a crazy moment, like, and also we don't get to see the people who watch our stuff, unlike live stand up, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Podcasts are, you see them in the comments, you see people in the
Yeah.
comments, you don't get to see who they are. So it was also nice and overwhelming to see the public that watches this, and it was really really it was a highlight moment for sure.
Now we have 100th episode of 442 coming up soon. We have
Yeah,
plans for
yeah,
it. So yeah,
man, that's going to
that's
be
there.
amazing. Also, what a day it is to
Yeah,
happen, to get to our 100th episode, if we can time it to the October 24th, I
fourth.
think. It'll
Yeah.
be fun.
Yeah. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for coming
Awesome.
on. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.